Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. I'm Duncan Golestani. Our top stories. Italy's two main populist parties call for peaceful protests after an unelected technocrat is chosen as Prime Minister. Trying to save the summit, talks resume aiming to reinstate a meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. More than 4 years after it went missing, the search for flight MH370 is to officially come to a close. And the Spider-Man of Paris, the migrant from Mali who rescued a toddler, is to be given French citizenship. Hello, welcome to the programme. Making Italy stable is now the job of a former official with the International Monetary Fund. Carlo Cottarelli will become Prime Minister after the country's two populist parties failed to form a coalition. A major obstacle in creating a government has been Italy's commitment to the single European currency, as James Reynolds reports.
This is Italy's newest Prime Minister designate. Carlo Cottarelli is a pro-Euro economist and a non-populist. The President has picked him to maintain Italy's current relationship with the European Union.
It's essential to defend our interests in Europe and be constructive. Italy is a founding country. Our role is essential, as is our continued participation in the euro.
But the populists, led here by the League's Matteo Salvini, have the numbers to reject the President's choice and force early elections. Mr. Salvini, who's been going up in the polls, wants the freedom to govern his way.
If the President of the Republic tells us, do as you want, but don't touch the European rules, we have a problem with democracy. Because I think in Italy, the people are sovereign and don't depend entirely on European markets and bureaucracies.
Wherever you look here, there are signs of Italy's 6-decade-long partnership with Europe. But this country has begun to shift. This is the country that helped to found the European Union. Why are the populist parties turning against it?
Because people think that Germany rules all Europe and Germany rules Italy, and they want to control Italy, and the agreements on European Union is an advantage for Germany and a disadvantage for Italy.
Italy is used to changing prime ministers, but this is much more serious than that. An election later this year may become an unofficial referendum on Italy's membership of the euro and on its place in the European Union that this country helped to create. James Reynolds, BBC News, Rome.
Well, our Europe correspondent, Katya Adler, has been looking at developments from Brussels.
Everyone is asking what is going on, and the short answer is that the political chaos that we were talking about last week as two populist parties were trying to form a coalition government has now turned into full-blown political crisis. And what does that mean? Well, it means different things to different people. So those who are running scared at the idea of a Eurosceptic populist nationalist government in Italy, the third largest economy in the Eurozone, so Brussels, the Italian establishment, big business and industry, they are breathing a sigh of relief tonight now that the Italian president has chosen an EU-friendly, establishment-friendly technocrat to try and form a government instead. But for those many, many Italians who voted loudly and clearly for change in their general election, a break from Italy's past, corruption, the same old faces, putting Brussels rules and regulations ahead, they think of the Italian people. They are furious tonight and they feel betrayed. Their parties are calling them out onto the streets this weekend. The Five Star Movement is looking into the possibility of trying to impeach the Italian president. It will be hard, frankly very hard, for this technocrat government to get off the ground, so fresh elections look likely.
Katya Adler in Brussels there. Efforts are continuing to put a planned summit between the US and North Korea back on track. The US delegation is due to have more talks with the North Koreans to find a way for the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump to go ahead. While the outcome is still unclear, it could still take place in Singapore as early as June 12th. Former US Assistant Secretary of State P.J. Crowley explained to the BBC how that might happen.
Well, I think a meeting will happen at some point. Whether it can happen on June 12th, a really good question. To me, there are still two primary unknowns that we have to answer if the summit is going to go ahead sooner rather than later. The first is, is Kim Jong-un prepared to trade his nuclear and missiles capability, for security and prosperity? And for Donald Trump, to the point just made that Kim Jong-un is not going to yield everything in a first meeting, is Donald Trump prepared to enter into an extended negotiating process with lots of interim steps over many years to accomplish the goal of denuclearization? We don't know the answer to either of those questions, and they'll be fundamental to whether you can have a summit that launches a process that can be successful.
Meanwhile, President Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have been discussing Korea by phone. They've confirmed they will meet before any summit between the US and North Korea takes place. With her assessment, here's the BBC's Laura Bicker in Seoul.
When it comes to those talks, they started Sunday in secret. It was yet another surprise on this peninsula. These are top diplomats from the US and from North Korea trying to reach some kind of deal that they can give to their leaders. So we think there was a breather yesterday, according to the agency Yonhap, and that they will start to resume talks. But just a few days ago, Donald Trump said that there would be no talks between the US and North Korea. Now we're looking at two sets of ongoing talks. First of all, here in the border, they're talking about the plans. And in Singapore, we understand talking about the logistics. So there are officials from North Korea and US meeting in Singapore over the next few days. But with regards to the talks here, there is a long way to go and a very short time to do it. Remember how far apart the two sides are. The US wants complete disarmament and then get economic rewards to North Korea. North Korea wants a phased approach. So somehow they're going to have to thrash out a deal that they can give to the leaders. And I think whether or not there's going to be any summit will depend on the outcome of those talks. I think you're seeing from Japan a little bit of nervousness. They do not want Donald Trump to allow North Korea to keep its nuclear weapons. I think there's a worry that Donald Trump sees a win here. He's already touted North Korea as a success after seeing the meet on 2 occasions now. So I think when it comes to whether or not what he's willing to give to get a win, I think there's a little bit of jitters going on in Japan. They're slightly worried that Donald Trump will go too far and leave either North Korea with weapons or agree to get rid of troops either here in the peninsula or in Japan. It is thought that North Korea might want Donald Trump to give away the nuclear umbrella that he puts over, that kind of protective umbrella that he puts over the peninsula and Japan. And I think Shinzo Abe will want reassurances that that's not the case.
Laura Bicker in Seoul there with her analysis. Let's take a look at some more stories making the news now. And the European Union is proposing a ban on single-use plastics in an attempt to protect marine life. The proposals target items like straws, cotton buds, cutlery and drink stirrers. They'd be replaced with more environmentally friendly materials. The EU also wants almost all plastic bottles to be collected for recycling by 2025. A state of emergency has been declared in the US state of Maryland after heavy rain caused flash flooding. One man is missing after 8 inches of rain fell in just 2 hours in some areas. Emergency services have been responding to people trapped in buildings as floodwaters deluged houses and swept away cars. And the Russian billionaire and owner of Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich, has been granted Israeli citizenship under the law of return, which allows Jews to become citizens of Israel. He has been unable to extend his British visa following growing diplomatic tension between London and Moscow. Israeli passport holders do not need a visa to enter Britain. The The search for the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 is due to end on Tuesday. It's just over 4 years since the passenger jet disappeared on a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. A search of a huge area of seabed off the coast of Australia has yielded nothing, and this latest 90-day search by a private company also appears to have failed. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head has been following the story from the start.
Well, it's very disappointing, obviously, most of all for the relatives, but also for this company, Ocean Infinity, who were very confident that with their more extensive equipment and with some refined views about where the wreckage might be, as people have analysed in particular drift patterns for the debris that has been found on the East African coast, that there was a higher chance, a much higher chance of finding it. They managed to search 80,000 square kilometres in just 3 months, whereas the previous search an area a little bit larger than that, but over a period of 2 years. So they covered a great deal more ground. They say that their equipment worked very well in extremely challenging conditions, both high seas and very mountainous terrain on the seabed where they looked. But they're clearly looking in the wrong area, and it simply opens up even more the mystery surrounding what happened, particularly at the end of MH370. There are conflicting theories about whether the plane was under the control of the pilot and might have glided a long way, or whether he flew it until he either lost consciousness or ran out of fuel and it plunged into the sea. And the difference in those theories makes a huge difference in the areas that people can look. So the possibility, and many people have theories, are that there are other areas close to the ones where they've been looking where it could still be located. And while the Malaysian government has said that for now it will not renew the contract it has with Ocean Infinity, and remember this is a no find, no fee contract, so the company doesn't get paid unless it finds the wreckage. They're not renewing that for the moment. But this is a new government in Malaysia. They pledged to re-look at the way in which MH370 was handled, to publish for the first time an absolutely full report into their own handling of that accident and that disappearance. And that, in that sense, there's still the option being left open there that new evidence and new thinking could restart a search at some stage in the future.
Jonathan Head there. Pressure to relax Northern Ireland's strict abortion laws is intensifying following Friday's referendum in the Irish Republic. The opposition Labour Party has added its voice to calls for women to be given the same rights across the UK. And in Belfast there have been demonstrations by those who want to see the law changed. From there, our Ireland correspondent Chris Page reports.
What do we want?
The calls for change have become louder. In Northern Ireland, abortions remain illegal unless there's a serious or permanent risk to a woman's health. Protesters say the law's outdated and unfair.
I feel like we're dragging behind the rest of Europe, the rest of the Western world.
It's like the Dark Ages. It's just incredible that we're still in this position here, especially now that the Republic has moved on.
The huge shift in attitudes on the other side of the Irish border has given these campaigners new momentum. But there's been no devolved government here for more than 500 days now. In the absence of Stormont, campaigners are turning their attention to Westminster.
This woman's story has made a big impact on the debate. Sarah Ewart travelled to England to end her pregnancy when doctors said her unborn child couldn't survive outside the womb.
It was a terrifying time and more traumatic than it should have been. If Stormont was up and running, we would be up there begging for their help, but it's not, so we're now asking Theresa May and Westminster to help us. We need the help now.
Activists in Dublin were already switching the focus to Belfast as the landslide referendum result was becoming clear on Saturday. 2/3 voted to liberalise abortion laws. Several former Tory cabinet ministers are among a number of MPs who want Parliament to pass legislation to allow more access to terminations in Northern Ireland. But the Democratic Unionist Party, on whom the Prime Minister relies for her parliamentary majority, are intent on keeping the restrictions.
My message for the Prime Minister is that this is a matter, a sensitive matter, which the people of Northern Ireland have the right to make a decision on under the devolution settlement. And she should not, just because there are siren voices from the Liberals and the left wing in the Westminster, she should not bow to that.
The government says Stormont should be deciding on the issue and that it shows the need to restore devolution.
It's time for May to legislate. Run!
This most personal of matters has become highly political. The social revolution in the Irish Republic is having repercussions north of the border and across the Irish Sea. Chris Page, BBC News, Belfast.
Stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come, the highest of high hills. We'll tell you about the women who wore their favourite footwear at 1,300 metres. Welcome back. This is BBC News, the latest headlines. Italy's two main populist parties call for peaceful protests after an unelected technocrat is chosen as Prime Minister. And talks have resumed between officials from the US and North Korea, aiming to revive a summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. In South Africa, there's been a surge in so-called land invasions, with poor communities illegally occupying empty properties. The governing ANC is under pressure to put more land in the hand of the black majority, and it's now considering confiscating land without paying compensation. That's causing alarm among some white farmers who fear echoes of the violence and intimidation that occurred in neighbouring Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe. Our correspondent Andrew Harding has more.
On the edge of Johannesburg, an empty field is proving too much of a temptation. Dozens of families have begun marking out plots for themselves.
Here, it's 20 feet up to here. And from here, it's 15 to that stick over there. Can you see that stick over there? Yes. Standing.
They know land grabbing is illegal, but still.
You just want a piece of land? Just a piece of land. Not so big, just a piece of land where I can put my family, build a house, live.
Within hours, the police arrive and tempers flare.
You will see the blood flowing like a river.
This isn't some isolated incident. It's a pattern that's now spreading across South Africa.
We need our land back. That's it. And they are going to grab it by force. They have to kill us.
That sort of rhetoric is growing, along with a focus on the country's powerful white minority.
It's so painful to us, man. If you can stand in my shoe and be empathic enough, you'll understand the situation I'm living in. And you'll never be able to stand for it. You must be able to talk to your fellow brothers and sisters who are white and exploiting us, man.
That frustration may be understandable in a country where blacks still own just 8% of all farmland. Now, under growing pressure, the governing ANC is talking about changing the constitution to enable it to seize white-owned land.
We can take the land, we should take the land using legal processes and being formal as a government, a responsible democratic government.
But quick.
But quick, and also not be told, go there, don't go there.
That kind of talk makes some South Africans nervous. To the north of Johannesburg, white landowners are on patrol.
Have you had security problems before?
Plenty. They cut our fence 2 weeks ago, and also last week they tripped it.
Some fear a repeat of the chaotic land grabs that crippled Zimbabwe, but others believe it's time to embrace reform.
Well, I think this moment politically is an enormous opportunity. We haven't seen this kind of opening up of debate around land, property relations for the past 20 years.
And here's how it can work. South of Johannesburg, 26-year-old Lerato Senakomo has taken over an abandoned farm with help from government. Now it's thriving, an example for others.
I am confident.
I'm convinced there's not going to be a Zimbabwe-style mess.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Like, I doubt it. Seriously, I do. I just think that we as people, we just need a little bit of push there and there, get a little bit of finance and start our productions. I don't think we'll fail.
But there is still plenty that could go wrong here. After dithering for years on land reform, the government here insists it is now going to act urgently. But what if it fails? Poor South Africans may not be patient for much longer. Some are already being pushed to the brink. This was another illegal settlement. We arrived just hours after it had been bulldozed by the authorities. We found a community in shock.
Where will you stay tonight?
I don't know. Don't know.
Let them come and talk to us as humans.
We must settle down.
We are humans of here. That's our country. And we can't sit here.
Our country, but not our land. That is the dilemma that South Africa needs to confront fast. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Johannesburg.
A migrant from Mali who climbed up the outside of an apartment block in Paris to rescue a small boy has been hailed a hero and is being likened to the superhero Spider-Man. Now, as a thank you, he's been promised French citizenship, as Lucy Williamson reports from Paris.
France has nicknamed him Spider-Man. His real name is Mamadou Gassama. When he saw a toddler dangling from a fourth-floor balcony, the Malian immigrant ran straight past the crowd of onlookers and began to climb. In less than a minute, he'd scaled the outside of the building, a neighbour holding on to the toddler until he arrived. With one leg swung across the balcony, Mamadou swept the child to safety. The child's father is now being questioned for apparently leaving him at home alone. This morning, Mr. Gassama was invited to meet President Macron, who asked him whether he'd stopped to think before climbing the building.
No, I wasn't thinking about anything. I just climbed. Once I started, God gave me the courage to continue.
The President awarded Mr. Gassama a bravery medal and certificate and offered him a role in the French fire service. He also invited him to apply for French citizenship. Mr. Gassama had documents allowing him to work in Italy, but not to enter France.
I am glad because it's my first time to win an award like this. I'm happy. Thank you.
I asked him the question about being afraid, and he told me no. I didn't think about myself. I was thinking about the child. When he started climbing, he got scared that the child would get tired and let go.
And after months of living in the shadows, Mamadou Gassama is tonight tasting sudden celebrity. The video of his dramatic ascent, which has spread like wildfire on social media, made him a nationwide hero before the French state even knew he was here. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Another gravity-defying story for you now. Have you ever heard of slacklining? It's walking between 2 points along a suspended line of webbing. 3 of the world's top female slackliners have put on their high-heeled shoes to make the walk, suspended more than 1,300 meters in the air in a world debut challenge in central China's Hunan province. Take a look at this breathtaking event. Slacklining. And finally, the South Korean boy band BTS has become the first K-pop group to top the US album charts. Let's have a quick listen. Despite not singing in English, BTS have already toured the US and sold out venues in cities across the country. Good for them. You're watching BBC News. Bye for now.
Hello there, good morning. On Monday there was some respite